Welcome to the second video on homeostatic mechanisms that looks through the last couple that we need to look at, including osmoregulation, which is a bit complicated. So again, we need to start off with a little bit of anatomy. So in order to understand osmoregulation, we need to understand the role of the kidneys and their function. So if you weren't aware, you have two kidneys that sit around here in your abdomen. These are heavily connected to the blood supply, as we'll see in a minute, but they also connect through the ureters to the bladder. It's one of the organs of the excretory system. So again, if you weren't aware, there are three types of waste that need to be removed from the body. So the gaseous waste we talked about last time in terms of actually carbon dioxide. Cells through cellular respiration produce carbon dioxide as a waste, which is removed through the bloodstream and then to the lungs where it's breathed out. So CO2 is a waste product produced by cells that needs to be removed through breathing. Obviously we have fecal matter waste as well. That's actually never been processed by cells and is in fact undigested material, and so that's very easy to remove because it's never really gone into the cellular system to begin with. This type of liquid waste that we have through urine and through the bladder is actually a third type of waste that is again produced by the cells, much like the CO2 from breathing. And so metabolism of proteins and other things like that produces wastes such as urea that need to be removed from blood and passed out. Now it's a little bit more complicated than just removing the carbon dioxide, as we'll see. So all sorts of wastes in blood, including this urea as our key model for understanding the molecules that need to be removed, enters the kidney through the blood system, and then there's a process of filtering, and then clean blood comes out, and then the waste leaves through the ureters down here and into the bladder. So dirty blood goes in, clean blood comes out here, wastes come out here. So the kidneys act as a separating system from the wastes and the good blood. At a more cellular level, what happens is the blood coming in, the dirty blood, is filtered through the Bowman's capsule, which is the capsule here, and the glomerulus is the fine capillary bed. And actually under pressure, the blood gets squeezed and filtered through. So all of the liquid materials can go through, but the larger things such as proteins and red blood cells don't get filtered out and they stay in the blood, whereas water and dissolved salts and sugars and other things like that do come out here into these loops of Henle, as it's called here, and into the filtrate, and then eventually out through the collecting duct. Now this would be fine, except that some of the stuff that gets squeezed through, like I said, is salts and sugars and water, as well as the urea and wastes. So what you want to end up here in the collecting duct is just some water and the urea and other wastes, and what you want to take back is all the good stuff, like the right amount of salt, all of the glucose you can get, and some of the water. And so that's what happens here, is that there's a reabsorption. So we've got three processes here. Filtration, in which the blood is separated into the dissolved components and I guess the non-dissolved components, or the larger things stay in the blood and those small things go through the filtration. Reabsorption of those small dissolved things that you want to keep, and then excretion of those wastes that you don't want to keep. And so there's an active reuptake of the good stuff that happens here as we go through reabsorption. It goes back into the blood, and so the clean blood coming out has all the good things back in it, and none of the bad, and the waste ends up out here. And so in fact for glucose, what we have here is a process of active transport to reabsorb that glucose. Obviously there's a whole lot of osmosis and diffusion and active transport and things that happen here in order to get the concentration gradients right and move the right things back into the blood, whereas the urea ends up in this excreted waste. So what's excreted is all the stuff that's filtered minus what gets reabsorbed. So how does this relate to homeostasis and what we call osmoregulation? So osmoregulation is a regulation of the amount of salt and liquid. So obviously these work in balance. The saltier things are, the less free fluid and water there is. And so there's a regulation again involving the hypothalamus and the pituitary here, where osmoreceptors, the ones that pick up the saltiness of the blood, detect an increase in osmotic pressure caused by saltiness, and relate through the posterior pituitary in this case to control blood vessels and kidneys. There's also baroreceptors. So if you know barometric refers to air pressure. So baroreceptors look at blood pressure and they detect an increase in blood pressure. Now if you think about it for a minute, if you have an increased volume of blood that's more diluted, and so you have more blood, that increases the pressure within the closed circuit. And so blood pressure is a way in which the body monitors the volume of blood and also therefore its dilution. So a combination of the concentration through osmoreceptors and the pressure through baroreceptors is how the nervous system monitors blood volume. Now, blood pressure and blood volume and dilution can be controlled by expanding and contracting, dilating blood vessels, changes blood pressure, and then how much water is reabsorbed by the kidney during that reabsorption phase will also control obviously blood volume, blood concentration, and blood pressure. So if your blood is getting more and more concentrated, it means your body is drying out, as it were, and so there will be more water reabsorbed by the kidney, which means there's less urine, highly concentrated urine, but more water reabsorbed. If, on the other hand, the system detects that there's high volume of water and too much high volume of blood and too much water, then you'll reabsorb less water from that filtrate, and the water ends up passing out through the urine. So you have large volumes of diluted urine if you have too much water in your system. And so the control of salts and water and osmotic pressure is very much strongly controlled by the kidney. And so all of these things are used in combination to control blood volume, blood pressure, and the saltiness of the blood, and therefore the saltiness of the fluids within the body. Fairly complicated one. Go through it, check some examples, and check your anatomy of the kidney as well. The last one is a bit more straightforward and one that we're fairly familiar with, the fight or flight response. We've all had that feeling of sudden stimulation of the nervous system through a fright or something else that causes the release of adrenaline. And obviously the clearest thing that we feel with that is the racing heart, the increasing heart rate. But basically this is a system that has evolved to prepare the body for fight, which is obviously fighting other things, fighting off a predator or fighting with prey, or flight, which just refers to running away quickly or escaping. And so in either case, though, you need to be ready for swift action. And so what happens is that the nervous system picks up that there's a threat. There's nerves that go to the adrenal glands, which are actually sitting here on top of the kidneys as well, and they all release adrenaline, which is known as epinephrine in the US, but adrenaline, which will then go through that blood vessels to all of the parts of the body and have multiple effects. So clearly we have the heart rate, so stronger heart rate, stronger, more powerful beats as well. The airways dilute, so you can increase the level of oxygen and more blood flow to the muscles. So all of those things are going to increase the rate at which oxygen can get to those muscles to be used for production of energy for rapid movement. You also see release of glucose. So again, respiration, the things that feed into respiration, glucose and oxygen being increased so that we can have increased energy. Pupils dilate, sweat increases because you're going to be running for a while, and you also have control of blood clotting, so that if you are injured in that fight or flight, you reduce your blood loss. And clearly digestion is not something we need to worry about right now, so the blood flow to the digestive system is diverted. We all obviously know that in the opposite sort of sense, when you've had a big meal and you need to do a lot of digesting, you tend to feel a bit more relaxed and slowed down. This does the opposite, is that we're not worrying about digesting now, so we need maximum energy for moving around the place. So for each of these examples, we're looking at how the nervous system, in particular the hypothalamus and the sensory parts of the nervous system, work to control the body through interactions with the endocrine system, and in particular that pituitary and the other glands connected to it. So all of these work together. You need to have an awareness of each of these examples of how homeostasis is maintained through the interactions of the nervous and endocrine systems.